Okay, so let's talk about the audits and investigations. So with ELD systems, a lot of my carriers, a lot of people that I've talked to think that, well, now I have an ELD system, so I don't actually have to do anything. Like the report, it just shows me the violations and I can't do anything about them. So one of the things that, Chrissy, I want to talk to you about is the audits and investigations. So with driver ID codes, ability to view, violation summaries, all of these things that are on that list, can you kind of go line by line and give me a little bit about what each one of these mean? And during an audit, what is the investigator actually looking for? What does it mean, as it's listed here for you, for the carrier, for the people watching this class? What does it mean for them to be audited for the ELD side of things?
All right, so we'll just start from the top. The biggest thing that I've noticed, or I can assume as far as the driver ID and the code, is they're going to want to make sure first that all your drivers that are required to do logbooks are on that list. And second off, you don't have extra drivers on that list. I did have one company that got in a lot of trouble because they were giving drivers multiple logins. So when they ran out of hours of service under one login, they would just log in another. Boom, right away during an audit, based off that very first thing they're going to see you have more drivers in your ELD system than on your roster. So keep that in mind. Any driver that is required to do hours of service, they're going to want to make sure it's on that list and that you don't have extra people on there. So when your drivers are termed out, ensure that you term them out, especially before a compliance review. The big thing, obviously, you've got to make your logbooks available to the auditor. Some cases, they'll accept the paper, but I just went through an audit last week where that auditor specifically wanted the web transfer. And again, keep in mind, once you do that web transfer to the database, it's there for 180 days no matter what. So if there is a driver error or something, you cannot go back and correct that. I do strongly encourage every motor carrier on the admin side to go in on a daily basis, especially when you're first rolling out, and ensure the accuracy of those logs and the violations. Because you will notice, I won't say 9 times out of 10, but a lot of time when drivers first start utilizing the system, they forget to log off duty when they either start for their 30-minute break or when they've stopped for the day. And if they forget that, you can go back in and make those adjustments. If you're on an ELD, the driver should be able to make those adjustments themselves. But if you don't go back in and look at those things, you're never going to make that edit, so that violation is going to continue to show. If you make that edit and your driver's confirmed and verified the edit, that violation will disappear. So be very proactive in going in and looking at these violations, especially when you're first starting, because there will be some driver error just on the fact they forget to log off. That ties in with the violation summary. With all my clients, I try to go in at least once a week, once every 7 days. I review every single violation, and I review every single unassigned vehicle mileage or driver time, whatever they call it, because sometimes with guys, when they hit violation, they'll just log out of their system thinking they're being sneaky. Well, they're not, because we get a report, and on some of the tablets, it actually shows right there that there's unassigned mileage. So you have to go through and you have to ensure all that mileage has been assigned back to the proper driver, and then also that those violations are actually true and accurate. I send all of our clients a report saying, hey, you may want to review. To me, it doesn't look like your driver logged out when he got to the yard on the 1st. That may be causing all these violations on the 2nd. It does take you and your drivers both being very, very, very proactive during your learning curve, so you guys can all get on board and understand why these edits need to be made, or why we need to ensure the driver knows he's not in violation. He probably forgot to log out. So you got to let your drivers know to communicate that if you've made it where they can't edit that, or if they're still on AOBRDs. The edits being made 9 times out of 10, it's going to show right there on the logbook when it's been made. If your logs aren't indicating that, just make sure you get with your provider and find out if there's a report you can print off showing all edits that have been made. Big thing is don't ever edit drive time. I strongly encourage you, because that system knows your truck was moving. The only time I will ever edit drive time is in the case maybe you have team drivers and they forgot to switch. You can reassign that to another driver. Or your truck was in the shop when the technician took it on a test drive. Well, that wasn't your driver. That wasn't John Doe's hours. So you don't want that to count against them. but there's very, very few situations where you'll edit that. And then me, I never actually edit it. I just reassign it. The record of sensor failures, it's not as common unless, to me, you have that rebellious driver usually. Maybe they'll try to unplug their device. I've heard stupid things where drivers will put aluminum over their relay and think it's going to trigger it. Well, it still comes back in an unidentified message, and it's still going to show a sensor failure. Now, don't get me wrong. There is plenty of times where you'll get notification that there was a communication error, because back to the plug and plays, your driver has his tablet or phone, then you have the truck's ECM, then you have the relay, and then you have the cloud. Some of these systems are set up where if it's even a tenth of a second off on communication, it's going to go over there on your sensor failure. But usually, typically after your malfunction or sensor failure, you're going to see where it was corrected right afterwards. So some of these reports will be god awful long, pages and pages, but typically you'll see the failure, you'll see it corrected. You'll see the failure, you'll see it corrected. When it's not corrected, you need to ensure you get with tech support right away. You get a case number and you have 8 days to fix that. It is your responsibility as a motor carrier to ensure if a system does crash for some reason, maybe your driver spilled a cup of coffee on it, that driver converts to the paper logs and you get the new unit in there as soon as possible. When it comes to web transfers, this is both for roadside inspections and compliance reviews, new entrant audits, whatever it may be. There is a system set up in every single ELD system, no matter who your provider is, where you and your driver must have the ability to go in and web transfer your logbooks. Now, when I first started doing this, I didn't realize the extent of a web transfer once I got the database up. So I was that silly driver that kept on hitting web transfer, and I was looking for confirmations and never got it. Well, just know every time they hit submit, it goes into this database. And any person with the authorization to get in there can go in and view your logs. So that's true for FMCSA auditors, roadside inspectors, scale houses. Once you have submitted that, it is in there for 180 days. So don't do it and don't just play with it to see if you can do it, because you're stuck with it. But you do want to ensure with your provider that you are able to do the web transfers, make sure you understand how to do it, and make sure your drivers do as well. I've only, since the mandate started fully last year and a half ago, I've only had 2 DPS officers or highway patrolmen allow us to do emails. They usually want those web transfers. But don't get me wrong, they'll typically take the emails if there's some kind of issue. So just again, train your drivers, make sure your admin and your staff know how to do it on the back end, because that is the preferred method nowadays of transfers on that. And then operating instructions, it goes right back to what we discussed with the cab books. You want to make sure you guys have all those tools available for both your drivers and kind of inspectors. Everybody's got to have those, and you always want to have those with you during a compliance review to provide your investigator with if they have additional questions that you can't answer.
So just to kind of piggyback off what you just said on the web transfer side, so back in the days, so with paper logs, this is officers would, stop driver roadside, look at their paper logs, give them violations, and unless they had proof, they have to submit proof whenever they give a violation. So a lot of them, before there was cell phones and all that stuff, there was no way to prove it. They couldn't keep the logbooks. So, then people would argue with them and say, well, that didn't happen. And then during compliance reviews, there was no way for the investigator to verify that that really is a violation. If they were kind of just listening to the carrier saying it wasn't really a violation, and then they'll show them some fake, recreated paper log that wasn't really real, and that's not really what the cop saw in the first place. So it became a problem. This way, it actually is proving right then and there the officer is giving you a violation for, say, violating the 14-hour rule or not doing the 30-minute break or whatever it may be. And now, because he's allowing for that, because he's saying, well, I want you to do the web transfer, now that is documented. Now they have proof so that you can't come back later and say, well, that cop was wrong. Or you can't try to data queue it later and say, that cop was wrong, it didn't really happen. And then, try to submit some fake edited document, because they have the original and what the cop was looking at. So with the web transfers on that side, I think that a lot of carriers, especially on like the record sensor failures and the web transfers, let's all be grown-ups here, drivers will try to get away with as much as they possibly can because their paycheck depends on how many miles they can operate and how many hours they can operate. I'm not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent, whatever it may be, but it does happen. You can find all over the internet where, oh, stop your ELDs. We can, all these little tricks on YouTube that says you won't get caught falsifying your logs on ELDs if you do this. That's all bullcrap. Just FYI, unless Chrissy, you have heard of some ingenious way, which I don't want to tell everybody, but for these drivers they think that they are getting away with something, but during audit, they're not getting away with anything. The officer, they might be able to make an excuse to the officer on the roadside, and the officer can't prove it at that moment. But during a compliance review, the investigator can prove it. And they just go back to this record sensor failures or these web transfers, and they say, no, that's not what happened at all. And now you're not only in more trouble, you're not just violating the rules at this point, your driver's not. You're actually in more trouble because you're allowing your drivers to falsify, which, like we said earlier, whenever we first started the session, that's worse. I would much rather get the violation for the driver being responsible, showing that we made those reprimands, made those corrective actions with the driver, than have it to where the FMCSA thinks we're allowing that. So just don't allow it. All of those drivers out there, if you're watching drivers, you are not getting away with anything. The FMCSA will catch you during a compliance review. Yes, you may be getting away with it roadside, but you're not going to get away with it during audit, so don't bother doing it. It's pointless. What do you think, Chrissy? Any additional feedback on what I just said?
Absolutely. Well, and all those systems are set up to pull odometers straight from the ECM. So if your odometer is moving, so is your drive time.
Yeah. There is no way to stop this. It knows when you shut it off. It knows when you spilt coffee on it. It might not know it was coffee versus a soda, whatever, or a pop in some areas, whatever it may be, but it knows there was something messed up. There's only so many times you're going to be able to tell an officer on the road or an investigator in an office doing an investigation, a compliance review, or whatever it may be, that the ELD system sucks. At the end of the day, what they're going to say is, well, then get rid of those ELD systems and get one that doesn't suck, which is why we kind of are giving you our top 4 picks, because our clients tell us that all the time. I'm using such and such system and it's horrible. There's nothing but glitches. There's nothing but violations. It's not doing anything right. At the end of the day, the DOT doesn't want to hear the excuses. They want to hear what you did to fix it. So, and I know that seems a little harsh, and yes, you're going to spend money, and yes, it's expensive. And Chrissy has some horror stories about, which, Chrissy, I don't want to talk about names of companies, but you might mention this story, but there's lawsuits involved. It's just a big drama going on. At the end of the day, the DOT didn't care. They don't care. What they say is this is what you have to have, and that's what they expect you to do.